This is Jewish Prepper 1, reading from the LDS Preparedness Manual, page 132, Surviving the City. Introduction. While we all want to do our best to prepare for a coming crisis, and many people realize the city is perhaps the worst place to live, very few of us are really prepared to pack up the old Winnebago and head for the hills. Most Americans, whether they're aware of it or not, are going to stay in cities. This is not a hasty decision for most people. Most of us depend on our city for our livelihoods, and we can better be prepared by continuing to live in the city, earn a good income, and make preparation for exiting the city at the appropriate time, or by staying in the city and living off existing supplies. This special report explains some of the most critical dangers of living in the city and presents some solutions to surviving them. If you are one of those people who has decided to stay in the city, you'll benefit greatly from this information. Cities are artificial. Every city is an artificial construct. Cities formed as people came together to conduct business, participate in social interaction, and benefit from efficiencies in public services, such as schools, sewers, water, etc., and a common defense, of course. Yet cities cannot survive alone. They need resources from the country, most notably food, water, and electricity. While electricity and water can sometimes be created or found within city limits, the acreage requirements of food dictate that no city could possibly feed its own people. Read that last phrase carefully. No city can feed its own people. Not one. Cities are, by their very nature, dependent on the importation of food. The advent of just-in-time delivery systems to our grocery stores means that most cities would run out of food within a week if supplies were for some reason disrupted. Remember, cities are not self-sufficient. Although they may seem to be in 2005, they have for a long time been entirely dependent on the American farmer for their support. Something almost all Americans take for granted, except the farmer, of course. Risks in the city. The city presents some serious risks during a crisis. The four most serious ones are 1. The collapse of social order, or riots. 2. The failure of the water treatment and delivery systems. 3. The depletion of food supplies. 4. The failure of the power grid. And 5. You may be quarantined. While not every situation will appear in every city, every situation will most certainly appear in some cities. Will that include yours? We'll tackle these one at a time. 1. The collapse of social order. Social order is a delicate thing, and it exists as a psychological barrier that could easily collapse under the right conditions. We all saw this during the LA riots following the Rodney King trial verdict, as citizens of LA set fire to their own town, yanked people from vehicles, and beat them literally to death, and even fired guns at firemen attempting to save their buildings. More recently, we were all witness to the looting, violence, and total breakdown of society following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. What allowed this to happen? Simple. The simultaneous melting away of the psychological barrier of order. Once people realized 911 couldn't handle the load or was offline, that the local police were helpless or had simply abandoned their posts, law and order ceased to exist in their minds. They then conducted their lives in the way they always wanted to, but couldn't because of the police. That is, they ran out to the local stores and just took whatever they wanted, looting. They took out the racial frustrations on innocent victims who happened to be driving through the area. and they let loose on a path of destruction that only stopped when men with rifles, the National Guard, were called in to settle things down. In other words, only the threat of immediate death stopped the looting and violence. Rifles work wonders. Imagine store owners lying prone on the roofs of their stores with AK-47s, firing at anyone who approached. This is exactly what happened in Los Angeles. But worse, imagine the lawless horde firing at the rescue copters trying to bring in supplies to the desperate masses in New Orleans. The National Guard eventually got things under control. This event was isolated, however, to one city. Imagine 100 cities experiencing the same thing. Will the National Guard be able to handle that load? Not likely. What about local police? They aren't fools. If things look bad enough, they'll grab their families and head for the hills, just like they did in New Orleans. No pension is worth getting killed for. A few U.S. cities could be transformed into literal war zones overnight. It would require all-out martial law and military force to have any chance whatsoever of bringing order to these streets. And the reality is that there are not enough military in the USA to secure all of the cities if this happens. This collapse of social order is perhaps the greatest risk of staying in the city during a crisis. What exactly would cause this collapse of social order? Lack of three things: food, water, and money. When people run out of food, some will begin ransacking their neighborhood, searching for something to eat. Remember that in a city, a neighbor does not mean the same thing as a neighbor in the country. They are not necessarily your friends. It won't take long, then, for violence to take over in some cities. While certain regions will certainly manage to keep things under control and people will form lines at the local depleted Red Cross shelters, other cities will see an explosion of violence. Imagine the gang-infested regions of LA, Chicago, New York, St. Louis, and New Orleans. Do you think those people are going to stand in line and wait? They already have guns. Now they finally get to use them. Pent-up racial tensions and hostilities will simply serve as a justification for shooting people of the same or other color in order to get their food. Even if the food somehow gets into the cities, lack of money due to the government not sending out checks could cause the same thing. Eventually, lack of money results in looting and mass theft. As the stealing balloons, it also results in a collapse of social order. Water, the same thing, but faster. The collapse of social order is also very dangerous because it doesn't require any actual collapse of the power grid, telecommunications, transportation, or banking. Social order is a psychological artifact. It is a frame of mind. And any global panic can quickly remove the mental barrier that right now keeps people basically lawful. We're going to continue this series with number 2, the failure of water treatment and delivery systems, in upcoming videos.